Welcome to our Christian channel, Whispers of Bible. If you are a true Christian, or if you are looking to grow deeper in your faith, this is the place for you. We invite you to subscribe, like, and share this channel with your family, friends, and fellow Christians. Let them be a part of this journey with us as we dive into the wisdom of the Bible, share God's love, and walk together in faith. Share this channel with your loved ones and encourage them to join us in this spiritual journey. Let's build a community of believers, supporting each other as we grow closer to God. Subscribe now, hit that notification bell, and share the message with those who are ready to experience the whispers of God.
The wisdom of Proverbs, life lessons for today. The Book of Proverbs stands as one of the most enduring voices of wisdom ever preserved in Scripture. Its words do not rush the reader, nor do they demand immediate answers. Instead, Proverbs invites quiet attention. It speaks in measured sentences, shaped by experience, observation, and reverence for God. Across centuries and cultures, its teachings have remained remarkably relevant, addressing the ordinary rhythms of human life, work and rest, speech and silence, pride and humility, discipline and mercy. In a world often marked by noise and urgency, Proverbs offers something rare, the steady counsel of wisdom patiently handed down through generations. At its heart, Proverbs is concerned with how life is lived. It does not primarily recount miracles or dramatic divine interventions. Instead, it focuses on daily choices, the words spoken in private, the habits formed over time, the paths chosen when no one else is watching. This is wisdom not meant to impress but to shape character. From its opening lines, Proverbs establishes its purpose clearly: to impart wisdom and instruction, to give insight to the simple, knowledge and discretion to the young, and deeper understanding to the wise. It is a book written for all stages of life, assuming that growth in wisdom is a lifelong journey rather than a destination quickly reached. The Hebrew word most often translated as wisdom in Proverbs is ed-rokmah. This term does not describe intelligence alone. It refers to skill, particularly the skill of living well. In ancient Israel, ha'okmah was used to describe the craftsmanship of artisans, the judgment of leaders, and the moral discernment of those who feared God. Wisdom, in this sense, was practical and embodied. It was proven not by clever speech, but by a life ordered rightly. Proverbs consistently links wisdom with action, emphasizing that true understanding reveals itself through behavior. To understand Proverbs fully, it is essential to place it within its historical and literary setting. The book belongs to a larger collection of writings often called wisdom literature, which also includes Job and Ecclesiastes. Unlike historical narratives or prophetic oracles, wisdom literature reflects on human experience itself. It asks how life works under God's rule and what patterns emerge when His order is either honored or ignored. Proverbs, in particular, approaches these questions with confidence. It assumes that God has woven moral order into creation, and that those who align themselves with that order will generally find life to be stable, fruitful, and meaningful. Traditionally, Proverbs has been closely associated with King Solomon, the son of David and king of Israel during its united monarchy. According to the biblical record, Solomon was renowned for his wisdom, which he received as a gift from God early in his reign. The historical setting of Solomon's rule, roughly the 10th century before Christ, was a time of relative peace and prosperity for Israel. This stability allowed for reflection, teaching, and the preservation of wisdom traditions. While Solomon is credited with composing many of the Proverbs, the book itself makes clear that it is a compilation drawing from multiple sources across generations. The opening chapters explicitly name Solomon as a principal contributor, and later sections introduce sayings from other wise figures, including a group identified as the wise and individuals such as Agur and King Lemuel. This layered authorship suggests that Proverbs grew over time, collecting insights tested by experience and valued by the community of faith. Rather than diminishing its authority, this process strengthens it. Proverbs represents wisdom refined through generations, shaped by communal reflection, and preserved because it proved trustworthy in real life. The structure of Proverbs reflects this gradual development. The first 9 chapters form an extended introduction, offering poetic reflections on wisdom, folly, discipline, and the fear of the Lord. These chapters often personify wisdom as a woman calling out to those willing to listen, contrasting her voice with that of folly, which leads toward destruction. This literary approach frames wisdom not as abstract knowledge, but as a relational pursuit, a voice to be heeded, a path to be followed. From chapter 10 onward, Proverbs shifts into shorter, more compact sayings. These individual proverbs often stand alone, each offering a concise observation about life. While they may appear disconnected at first glance, together they form a mosaic of moral insight. They address topics such as honesty, diligence, self-control, generosity, leadership, family relationships, and the power of speech. Each proverb invites reflection, requiring the listener to pause and consider how its truth applies to their own circumstances. It is important to recognize what Proverbs is and what it is not. Proverbs offers general truths rather than absolute promises. Its sayings describe how life ordinarily unfolds when certain principles are followed or ignored. This distinction is essential. Proverbs teaches that diligence tends toward prosperity and laziness toward want, that gentle words foster peace while harsh speech stirs conflict. Yet it does not deny the complexities of life, where righteous people may suffer and the wicked may prosper for a time. Instead, Proverbs focuses on long-term patterns shaped by moral choices under God's sovereignty. Central to the entire book is a single foundational statement: the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. This phrase does not refer to terror or dread. Rather, it describes a posture of reverent awe, humility, and trust before God. To fear the Lord is to recognize Him as the source of truth, order, and life itself. Wisdom begins not with human reasoning alone, but with acknowledgement of God's authority. Without this orientation, Proverb insists, knowledge becomes fragmented and ultimately distorted. In the ancient world, Israel was not alone in valuing wisdom literature. Surrounding cultures, including Egypt and Mesopotamia, also produced collections of moral sayings and instructional texts. Proverbs shares certain similarities with these writings, such as its concern for ethical behavior and social harmony. Yet it differs in a crucial way. Its wisdom is firmly rooted in relationship with the living God. Whereas other wisdom traditions often appealed to cosmic order or social convention, Proverbs consistently grounds its counsel in covenant faithfulness to the Lord. This theological foundation gives Proverbs its distinctive voice. Wisdom is not merely a tool for personal success. It is a response to God's character. Justice, honesty, mercy, and self-restraint are valued not only because they improve society, but because they reflect the nature of God Himself. In this way, Proverbs bridges daily life and spiritual devotion, showing that faith is not confined to worship alone, but expressed in every choice made throughout the day. As this documentary unfolds, the Book of Proverbs will be explored not as a collection of disconnected sayings, but as a coherent vision for living wisely in God's world. Its lessons speak to the ancient past and the modern present alike, offering guidance for navigating relationships, work, temptation, suffering, and joy. Though written centuries ago, Proverbs addresses questions that remain deeply familiar. How should one speak? How should one act when faced with temptation? What leads to lasting peace? What does it mean to live well? In beginning this journey, it is worth remembering that Proverbs does not promise quick answers or effortless transformation. Wisdom, as it presents it, is cultivated slowly through attentiveness, humility, and obedience. It requires listening before speaking, restraint before action, and trust before understanding. Above all, it calls the listener to walk in the fear of the Lord, believing that his ways, though sometimes demanding, ultimately lead to life. With this historical and spiritual foundation in place, we are now prepared to move deeper into the world that shaped Proverbs, examining the cultural setting of ancient Israel and the formative influences that shaped its wisdom tradition. From there, the voices within Proverbs will begin to speak more clearly, guiding us step by step into a life shaped by understanding, discernment, and reverent faith. To understand the wisdom preserved in the Book of Proverbs, one must step into the cultural and social world in which it emerged. Ancient Israel was not a society driven by abstract philosophy or detached speculation. It was a community shaped by land, family, covenant, and daily survival. Wisdom was not learned in isolation, but transmitted through lived experience within households, marketplaces, courts of justice, and places of worship. Proverbs reflects this environment, revealing how faith and daily life were deeply intertwined. In the ancient Near Eastern world, knowledge was primarily passed down orally. Fathers instructed sons, elders advised the young, and skilled teachers gathered students to share insights shaped by years of observation. Proverbs mirrors this tradition repeatedly. The recurring phrase, "My son," is not merely poetic. It reflects the intimate setting of instruction, where wisdom was imparted through close relationships. Teaching was not simply informational, it was formational. The goal was not only to inform the mind, but to shape character. Family stood at the center of Israelite society. The household was the primary place of moral and spiritual education. Children learned not only trades and responsibilities, but values: how to speak truthfully, how to treat neighbors, how to honor God. Proverbs places strong emphasis on parental instruction, especially the role of a father guiding his child toward wisdom. This reflects a cultural understanding that wisdom must be cultivated early before destructive habits take root. Education in ancient Israel did not resemble modern schooling. There were no widespread formal institutions for learning among the general population. Instead, wisdom was embedded in daily routines. Agricultural work taught patience and diligence. Legal disputes demonstrated justice and fairness. Community worship reinforced reverence for God. Proverbs draws heavily from these everyday realities, using familiar images such as fields, vineyards, scales, gates, and paths. These images grounded wisdom in ordinary life, making its lessons accessible and memorable. Within this cultural setting, the early life of King Solomon holds particular significance. Born into the royal household of David, Solomon grew up during a formative period in Israel's history. His father David was not only a warrior and king, but also a poet and worshipper. The spiritual atmosphere of Solomon's upbringing would have been shaped by David's deep devotion to God, as well as by the political complexities of royal life. Solomon witnessed both the triumphs and failures of leadership, learning firsthand the consequences of obedience and disobedience. According to the biblical record, Solomon's defining moment came early in his reign. When God invited him to ask for whatever he desired, Solomon did not request wealth or power, but wisdom to govern the people with discernment and justice. This request reveals much about Solomon's character and the values instilled in him. Wisdom, in this context, was not self-serving. It was sought for the benefit of others, rooted in humility and recognition of responsibility. This divine gift of wisdom did not exist apart from effort. Solomon's wisdom was cultivated through observation, reflection, and engagement with the world around him. He is described as speaking thousands of proverbs and composing songs, drawing insight from nature, human behavior, and the rhythms of life. His wisdom extended beyond Israel, attracting leaders from other nations who came to hear his counsel. This international recognition suggests that biblical wisdom was not narrow or isolated, but capable of addressing universal human concerns. Yet Proverbs is not the product of Solomon alone. The book reflects a broader wisdom tradition, shaped by many voices over time. Groups identified simply as the wise contributed sayings that were preserved and valued by the community. These individuals were likely respected elders, judges, scribes, or teachers whose insights proved reliable in guiding life. Their inclusion emphasizes that wisdom is communal, refined through shared experience rather than individual brilliance. The presence of other named contributors, such as Agur and Lemuel, further broadens the scope of Proverbs. Their sayings introduce perspectives that complement Solomon's teachings, addressing themes such as humility, self-control, and righteous leadership. The diversity of voices within Proverbs reflects a culture that valued learning from multiple sources, provided those insights aligned with reverence for God. Culturally, Israel existed at a crossroads of civilization. Trade routes connected it to Egypt, Mesopotamia, and surrounding regions. This exposure brought contact with foreign wisdom traditions, some of which influenced Israelite literature stylistically. Certain proverbs resemble Egyptian instructional texts in form and structure. However, Israelite wisdom remained distinct in its theological foundation. While other cultures emphasized harmony with cosmic forces or loyalty to rulers, Proverbs consistently anchored wisdom in loyalty to the Lord. The concept of covenant played a central role in shaping Israel's understanding of wisdom. Unlike neighboring societies, Israel believed it was bound to God through a sacred agreement. Obedience was not merely pragmatic, it was relational. Wisdom, therefore, was not simply about achieving success, but about living faithfully within this covenant relationship. Proverbs reflects this conviction by repeatedly connecting moral behavior with spiritual allegiance. Another key cultural element shaping Proverbs was the role of community accountability. Life in ancient Israel was lived publicly. Elders gathered at city gates to settle disputes and render judgments. Reputation mattered deeply, as one's actions affected not only personal standing but family honor. Proverbs frequently addresses themes such as integrity, honesty in business, and fairness in judgment, reflecting a society where ethical behavior was essential to communal stability. The imagery of paths and ways appears often in Proverbs, reflecting a worldview in which life was understood as a journey shaped by choices. This metaphor resonated deeply in a culture accustomed to travel by foot across familiar routes. To choose wisdom was to walk a path leading toward life and peace. To choose folly was to stray into danger and loss. These images reinforced the idea that moral decisions were not isolated moments but steps along a direction that shaped one's future. Religious practice also influenced the formation of wisdom. Worship in ancient Israel was not detached from ethics. Sacrifices, prayers, and festivals reinforced the holiness of God and the importance of obedience. Proverbs echoes prophetic themes by emphasizing that external rituals mean little without righteous living. Wisdom is portrayed as aligning one's heart and actions with God's character rather than merely performing religious duties. It is also important to acknowledge the social realities reflected in Proverbs. The book addresses wealth and poverty with realism, acknowledging both opportunity and injustice. While it affirms that diligence often leads to provision, it also calls for compassion toward the poor and warns against exploiting the vulnerable. This balanced perspective reflects a society aware of economic disparities and moral responsibility. As Proverbs took shape over generations, its teachings were preserved because they worked. They guided people through uncertainty, conflict, and decision-making. Parents saw their children benefit from these lessons. Leaders found stability through wise counsel. Communities experienced peace when justice and restraint were practiced. This practical effectiveness ensured that Proverbs was not merely admired but lived. By understanding the cultural world and formative influences behind Proverbs, its teachings gain greater clarity and depth. These sayings did not emerge in abstraction. They were forged in the realities of family life, leadership challenges, economic pressures, and spiritual devotion. Wisdom, as Proverbs presents it, is rooted in history yet timeless in application. With this cultural and personal foundation established, the next part of this journey will explore how these wisdom principles began to take shape in action, how they were taught, applied, and embodied in the early expressions of Israel's wisdom tradition, setting the stage for the unfolding lessons that Proverbs continues to offer. As the wisdom tradition of Israel matured, its teachings did not remain confined to private reflection or family instruction alone. wisdom moved outward into public life, shaping leadership, justice, worship, and the moral imagination of the people. The early expressions of this wisdom, what might be called its early ministry, were not organized around sermons or formal institutions, but around consistent practice. Wisdom was lived before it was written, embodied before it was compiled. Proverbs preserves the distilled results of this process, capturing truths that had already proven their worth in the rhythms of life. In the earlier stages, wisdom functioned as guidance for living within God's created order. The people of Israel believed that God had structured the world with intention and meaning. Seasons followed patterns, actions carried consequences, and moral behavior aligned with divine design. Wisdom, therefore, was the ability to recognize and live in harmony with this order. Proverbs reflects this understanding repeatedly, presenting wisdom as something to be sought diligently, guarded carefully, and practiced faithfully. The early spread of wisdom teaching occurred primarily through relationships of trust. Fathers instructed sons, mentors guided apprentices, and elders counseled younger members of the community. These early teachers were not philosophers in the abstract sense. They were farmers, judges, craftsmen, and leaders who had observed life closely. Their authority did not come from titles, but from credibility earned through experience. Proverbs often assumes this setting, where instruction flows from one generation to the next with urgency and care. One of the earliest and most consistent themes in Proverbs is the call to listen. Wisdom begins not with speaking, but with hearing. The repeated exhortation to hear, "My son," underscores the importance of humility at the beginning of the journey. In a culture that valued honor and reputation, listening required restraint and self-discipline. Proverbs teaches that those who refuse instruction cut themselves off from growth, while those who receive correction position themselves for understanding. Early wisdom teaching also emphasized discernment, the ability to distinguish between what appears attractive and what is truly beneficial. Proverbs does not deny that foolishness often presents itself with charm or promise. Instead, it warns that appearances can deceive. This theme likely emerged from real-life observation, where individuals were drawn into harmful paths through enticing words or short-term gain. Wisdom sought to train the heart to see beyond the immediate moment, weighing actions by their long-term effects. In the early stages of Israel's wisdom tradition, speech was recognized as one of the most powerful forces shaping life. Words could heal or wound, build trust, or destroy relationships. Proverbs devote significant attention to the tongue, reflecting a society where oral communication dominated daily interaction. Without written contracts or digital records, a person's word carried immense weight. Wisdom taught restraint, honesty, and thoughtfulness in speech, recognizing that careless words could unravel communities. Justice and leadership also played a central role in early wisdom expression. Israel's leaders were expected to govern not by personal ambition, but by righteousness. Proverbs offers guidance for kings, judges, and officials, reminding them that authority is a trust granted by God. Early wisdom teaching warned against favoritism, corruption, and arrogance, emphasizing that leadership detached from wisdom leads to instability and suffering. These teachings likely arose from observing both wise and unwise rulers and the effects of their decisions on the people. Another defining feature of early wisdom practice was the emphasis on diligence. Agricultural life shaped Israel's understanding of effort and reward. Fields required consistent care, and neglect produced predictable results. Proverbs uses these realities to illustrate moral truths, linking diligence with provision and laziness with loss. These sayings were not meant to shame, but to instruct, encouraging responsibility and foresight as expressions of wisdom. At the same time, Proverbs acknowledges the limits of human control. While it affirms that wise behavior generally leads toward stability, it also recognizes that outcomes are ultimately in God's hands. Early wisdom teaching balanced effort with trust, urging individuals to plan carefully while remaining humble before divine sovereignty. This tension prevented wisdom from becoming rigid or self-righteous, grounding it instead in dependence on God. The early development of wisdom also involved confronting folly directly. Proverbs does not soften its language when describing the consequences of rejecting wisdom. Folly is portrayed not merely as ignorance, but as moral resistance and unwillingness to be corrected. Early teachers understood that some lessons could not be learned through instruction alone. Proverbs reflects this reality by observing that folly often brings its own consequences, serving as a harsh but effective teacher. In these early stages, wisdom was closely linked with moral character. Traits such as humility, patience, generosity, and self-control were consistently praised, while pride, anger, greed, and deceit were warned against. These values did not emerge from theoretical debate, but from long observation of what sustained families and communities. Proverbs presents character not as an abstract ideal, but as the foundation upon which decisions are made. Religious devotion shaped early wisdom profoundly. The fear of the Lord was not an isolated concept, but the atmosphere in which wisdom flourished. Early wisdom teachers believed that moral insight flowed from a right relationship with God. Reverence fostered humility, and humility opened the way to instruction. Without this orientation, knowledge could become distorted, serving selfish ends rather than righteous living. Wisdom also addressed relationships beyond the family. Friendships, neighborly conduct, and social responsibility appear frequently in Proverbs. Early wisdom teaching emphasized faithfulness, loyalty, and honesty as essential to trust. Betrayal, gossip, and manipulation were condemned not only for their harm to individuals, but for their corrosive effect on the community. Proverbs reflects a society keenly aware that shared values were necessary for communal survival. Another important aspect of early wisdom practice was the use of contrast. Proverbs often places wisdom and folly side by side, inviting the listener to compare their paths and outcomes. This method of instruction sharpened moral awareness, encouraging reflection rather than passive acceptance. By presenting choices clearly, wisdom teachers sought to awaken responsibility, reminding individuals that their decisions shaped their future. As these wisdom principles were lived and tested, they began to be formalized into sayings that could be remembered and repeated. The concise structure of many proverbs reflects this process. Short, vivid statements were easier to recall and share, allowing wisdom to circulate widely. Over time, these sayings were collected, preserved, and eventually written down, forming the core of what would become the Book of Proverbs. The early ministry of wisdom, then, was not marked by public proclamation alone, but by consistent presence. Wisdom accompanied people into their work, their homes, their conflicts, and their celebrations. It shaped how they spoke, planned, corrected, and forgave. Proverbs captures this lived reality, offering insight not only into what wisdom taught, but how it functioned within the life of Israel. By examining these early expressions of wisdom in action, Proverbs begins to reveal its deeper purpose. It is not content with informing the mind alone. It seeks to train the heart, direct the will, and align daily life with God's design. Wisdom, as Proverbs presents it, is not inherited automatically nor gained instantly. It is cultivated through attentiveness, discipline, and reverent trust. With this foundation laid, the next part will move into the moments where wisdom is tested most intensely, where choices become conflicts, and where adherence to wisdom faces opposition, temptation, and challenge. These turning points reveal the cost of wisdom, but also its enduring power. As wisdom moves from instruction into lived experience, it inevitably encounters resistance. The teachings preserved in Proverbs do not exist in a world where right choices are always easy or immediately rewarded. Instead, wisdom is tested at moments of tension, when desire competes with restraint, when pride challenges humility, and when short-term gain tempts individuals to abandon long-term faithfulness. Proverbs addresses these turning points directly, revealing how conflict becomes the proving ground of wisdom. One of the most significant conflicts presented in Proverbs is the tension between wisdom and folly. This is not portrayed as a mild difference in opinion, but as a fundamental divergence of paths. Wisdom and folly are often personified, each calling out to the listener, each offering a vision of life. Wisdom promises stability, life, and peace, while folly appeals to appetite, impulse, and secrecy. The conflict lies not in a lack of information, but in the heart's willingness to choose rightly. These moments of decision often arise in ordinary settings. Proverbs does not reserve its warnings for extraordinary circumstances. Temptation appears in the marketplace, the home, and the private thoughts of the heart. The allure of dishonest gain, the impulse to speak in anger, the desire to take shortcuts, these are the battlegrounds where wisdom is either affirmed or rejected. Proverbs insists that the smallest decisions, repeated over time, determine the direction of a life. One recurring conflict centers on pride. Proverbs treats pride as a turning point that separates the wise from the foolish. Pride resists correction, dismisses counsel, and elevates the self above others. Wisdom, by contrast, begins with humility, a recognition of one's limitations and need for guidance. Proverbs repeatedly warns that pride leads toward downfall, not as an arbitrary punishment, but as a natural consequence. When individuals refuse to listen, they isolate themselves from insight that could prevent harm. Another major area of conflict involves speech. Words have the power to shape outcomes, yet controlling the tongue requires discipline. Proverbs observes that in moments of anger or excitement, speech can easily become destructive. The turning point occurs when one chooses either restraint or impulse. Wisdom counsels patience, urging silence over rash words. This conflict is especially significant because words once spoken cannot be retrieved. Proverbs treat speech as a test of inner character, revealing whether wisdom truly governs the heart. Conflict also arises in the realm of relationships. Proverbs recognizes that human interactions are fraught with misunderstanding, jealousy, and betrayal. Wisdom must navigate these complexities without hardening into bitterness or naivety. The book addresses conflicts between friends, neighbors, and family members, offering guidance rooted in honesty and loyalty. It warns against stirring strife for personal advantage and condemns gossip as a force that fractures trust. Perhaps one of the most vivid conflicts portrayed in Proverbs is the temptation of moral compromise. The text does not avoid addressing sexual temptation, portraying it as a powerful force capable of derailing a life. This conflict is described with urgency and realism, acknowledging the emotional and physical pull involved. Wisdom does not merely forbid, it explains the cost. Proverbs presents moral failure not as an isolated act, but as a path that leads away from life, often beginning with small, seemingly harmless steps. Economic choices also present turning points where wisdom is tested. Proverbs speaks to business practices, generosity, and the pursuit of wealth. It recognizes the necessity of provision but warns against greed and exploitation. The conflict emerges when financial gain is pursued at the expense of integrity. Wisdom insists that dishonest scales and deceitful practices ultimately undermine stability, even if they appear profitable in the moment. These teachings reflect real conflicts faced in commerce, where ethical boundaries can blur under pressure. Leadership presents another arena of conflict. Proverbs offers counsel to rulers and those in authority, recognizing that power intensifies. Moral challenges. The temptation to rule harshly, accept bribes, or favor certain individuals over others threatens justice. Wisdom calls leaders to humility and accountability, reminding them that authority is granted by God and exercised under His judgment. These teachings suggest a history of observing both righteous and corrupt leadership and their effects on the people. At a broader level, Proverbs acknowledges the conflict between immediate pleasure and long-term well-being. Folly often promises quick satisfaction without regard for future consequences. Wisdom, however, requires patience, a willingness to delay gratification in pursuit of lasting good. This conflict is especially difficult because the rewards of wisdom are not always immediate or visible. Proverbs encourages perseverance, assuring that faithfulness yields fruit over time. There is also an internal conflict addressed repeatedly in Proverbs, the struggle between self-control and impulse. Anger, envy, and desire arise naturally, but wisdom governs response. Proverbs does not deny emotion, it seeks to order it. The turning point comes when one chooses restraint over reaction. This inner battle is portrayed as central to wise living, emphasizing that mastery of self is greater than outward success. Importantly, Proverbs does not present these conflicts as abstract moral dilemmas detached from reality. They are woven into daily life, emerging unexpectedly and demanding response. Wisdom is not measured by knowledge alone, but by action in these decisive moments. Proverbs observes that those who consistently choose wisdom may face difficulty, but they avoid deeper harm. Those who repeatedly choose folly may experience temporary ease, but their path leads toward loss. Throughout these conflicts, the fear of the Lord remains the guiding principle. When wisdom seems costly or inconvenient, reverence for God anchors decision-making. Proverbs teaches that loyalty to God provides clarity when circumstances are confusing. This spiritual orientation transforms conflict into an opportunity for growth rather than defeat. As these turning points accumulate, they shape character. Each choice reinforces a direction, forming habits that either strengthen wisdom or entrench folly. Proverbs portrays life as dynamic, where direction matters more than isolated incidents. This perspective offers hope as well as warning. It suggests that change is possible through consistent, wise choices guided by reverence for God. The conflicts presented in Proverbs reveal that wisdom is not passive. It requires courage, patience, and self-denial, yet it also offers protection, clarity, and peace. These tensions prepare the way for deeper reflection on the inner struggles that accompany the pursuit of wisdom, the battles within the heart that shape transformation. The next part will explore these spiritual struggles more closely, examining how wisdom confronts fear, desire, doubt, and discipline, and how these inner battles lead either to growth or to decline. Beneath the outward choices and visible conflicts addressed in Proverbs lies a deeper arena of struggle, the inner life of the heart. Proverbs consistently teaches that wisdom is not merely a matter of correct behavior, but of inward formation. Actions flow from desires, attitudes, and motivations that are often unseen. It is within this internal landscape that the most profound battles are fought, and where true transformation either begins or is resisted. One of the central spiritual struggles presented in Proverbs is the tension between teachability and resistance. Wisdom requires openness to correction, yet the human heart often resists being challenged. Proverbs observes that rebuke is painful in the moment, but life-giving in the long term. The wise person is not defined by perfection, but by responsiveness, by the willingness to receive instruction even when it exposes weakness. This struggle is deeply spiritual because it touches pride, self-image, and humility before God. The fear of the Lord, described as the foundation of wisdom, is not a static state. It must be cultivated continually through trust and reverence. Proverbs acknowledges that familiarity can dull reverence, and success can breed complacency. The struggle, then, is to maintain awe toward God in both prosperity and hardship. Wisdom teaches vigilance of the heart, reminding the listener that drifting away from reverence often begins subtly through neglect rather than rebellion. Another significant internal struggle addressed in Proverbs is the battle against fear of people. Human approval exerts powerful influence, shaping decisions and silencing conviction. Proverbs warns that fearing others leads to compromise, while trusting in the Lord provides security. This struggle is especially acute in social and leadership contexts, where pressure to conform can outweigh commitment to righteousness. Wisdom calls for courage rooted in faith, enabling individuals to stand firm even when such choices bring isolation. Desire itself becomes a focal point of spiritual struggle in Proverbs. The book does not portray desire as inherently evil, but it recognizes its capacity to dominate the will if left unchecked. Appetite, ambition, and pleasure can easily become controlling forces. Proverbs urges restraint, teaching that ungoverned desire leads to loss of freedom rather than fulfillment. This struggle highlights the need for inner discipline, which wisdom frames as an act of reverence toward God. Anger presents another internal battle. Proverbs acknowledges that anger arises quickly and feels justified in the moment, yet it warns that unchecked anger leads to regret and fractured relationships. The wise person learns to pause, to listen, and to respond thoughtfully rather than reactively. This transformation does not occur instantly. It requires repeated surrender of impulse to understanding, reinforcing wisdom's emphasis on patience as a spiritual virtue. Envy and comparison also emerge as subtle yet corrosive struggles. Proverbs observes that envy rots contentment and distorts perception. When individuals measure themselves against others, gratitude erodes and bitterness takes root. Wisdom counters this struggle by redirecting focus toward faithfulness and trust in God's provision. The transformation involves learning to rejoice in what is given rather than resent what is withheld. Another deeply personal struggle addressed in Proverbs is the tension between secrecy and transparency. The temptation to hide wrongdoing or rationalize compromise is strong. Proverbs teaches that concealed sin brings unrest, while confession and integrity lead to peace. This struggle underscores the importance of honesty before God and others. Wisdom insists that freedom is found not in concealment but in truth. Proverbs also speaks to the struggle of delayed reward. Wisdom does not always yield immediate results. The righteous may endure seasons of obscurity, while the foolish appear to prosper. This reality tests faith and perseverance. Proverbs encourages endurance, reminding the listener that outcomes unfold over time. Transformation occurs as individuals learn to value faithfulness over immediate recognition. At the heart of these struggles lies the issue of trust. Wisdom calls individuals to trust God's order, even when circumstances seem contradictory. This trust is not blind, it is grounded in reverence and experience. Proverbs presents trust as an active choice, reaffirmed daily through obedience. The transformation that results is not merely behavioral but relational, deepening reliance on God. The inner life described in Proverbs is not isolated from community. Spiritual struggles are shaped by relationships, counsel, and example. Proverbs emphasizes the role of wise companions in fostering growth. Isolation, by contrast, intensifies internal battles. Wisdom recognizes that transformation often occurs through shared accountability and encouragement. Over time, these inner struggles refine character. Proverbs does not promise an absence of conflict, but it assures that wisdom equips individuals to navigate these battles with increasing clarity. Transformation is gradual, marked by growing discernment and steadiness. The wise person learns to recognize internal warning signs and to respond with humility and restraint. This process of inner formation prepares the way for moments of decisive clarity, times when accumulated wisdom guides action with confidence. These moments represent the culmination of struggle and growth, where wisdom's voice becomes unmistakable. Proverbs portrays such clarity as the fruit of long faithfulness rather than sudden insight. As this journey continues, attention will turn to the climactic expressions of wisdom, the points at which its teachings converge most powerfully, revealing the ultimate contrast between life aligned with God's order and life shaped by resistance. These moments illuminate wisdom's enduring promise and its uncompromising call. As the wisdom tradition reaches its most concentrated expression, Proverbs brings its teachings to a point of convergence, a climax, where the meaning of wisdom becomes unmistakably clear. This is not a climax defined by a single dramatic event, but by the cumulative weight of truth revealed through contrast. Life and death, wisdom and folly, righteousness and wickedness are set before the listener with increasing clarity. Proverbs insists that no one remains neutral. Every life moves toward an outcome shaped by choices repeatedly made. At this climactic point, wisdom is no longer presented merely as instruction but as a summons. Wisdom calls out publicly, lifting her voice in the streets and at the city gates. This imagery signals urgency. The invitation is open, but the time to respond is not endless. Wisdom speaks before consequences arrive, offering understanding to those willing to listen. The intensity of this call reflects the seriousness of what is at stake. Proverbs makes clear that wisdom is not hidden or inaccessible. It is offered generously, yet often ignored. Opposite wisdom stands folly, equally vocal and equally persuasive. Folly's appeal is subtle and dangerous, promising pleasure without consequence and freedom without responsibility. Proverbs describes folly as loud yet shallow, confident yet empty. The climactic tension lies in the similarity of their invitation. Both wisdom and folly call to the same audience. The difference lies not in availability but in outcome. Proverbs brings this contrast into sharp focus, compelling the listener to consider where each path leads. At the height of its message, Proverbs reveals that wisdom is inseparable from life itself. To choose wisdom is to choose life, stability, and peace. To reject it is to embrace disorder and eventual loss. This is not framed as arbitrary reward and punishment, but as alignment or misalignment with God's created order. Wisdom corresponds to how the world was designed to function under God's rule. When one lives wisely, life flourishes. When one resists wisdom, the fabric of life begins to unravel. This climactic vision also confronts the illusion of independence. Proverbs dismantles the idea that individuals can define reality on their own terms without consequence. It insists that moral autonomy leads not to freedom but to fragmentation. True freedom, according to Proverbs, is found in submission to God's wisdom. This message reaches its peak in repeated affirmations that the Lord sees all paths, weighs all hearts, and directs outcomes beyond human control. One of the most striking features of this climax is the way Proverbs addresses the listener directly. The tone becomes personal and insistent. The teachings are no longer distant observations but urgent appeals. Wisdom is portrayed as grieving over those who refuse instruction, not out of anger but out of sorrow for the consequences they will face. This emotional depth underscores the relational nature of wisdom. It is not indifferent to human choice. It longs to protect and preserve. At this point, Proverbs also clarifies that wisdom is not merely moral correctness, but intimacy with God's purposes. Wisdom rejoices in God's creation, delighting in justice, order, and truth. It is portrayed as present at the foundations of the world, woven into creation itself. This poetic depiction elevates wisdom beyond practical advice, revealing it as a reflection of God's own character. To embrace wisdom, then, is to participate in God's design. The climax further exposes the cost of rejecting wisdom. Proverbs does not soften its warnings. Those who persistently ignore wisdom eventually face the consequences of their choices without relief. This is not because wisdom abandons them capriciously, but because they have consistently refused her voice. Proverbs presents this moment soberly, emphasizing that the time for instruction has passed and the time for outcome has arrived. The gravity of this warning gives weight to every preceding invitation. Yet even here, the emphasis remains on responsibility rather than despair. Proverbs does not portray humanity as helpless. The climactic message reinforces that wisdom was always available, instruction always offered. The tragedy lies not in lack of opportunity, but in refusal. This perspective affirms human agency while maintaining God's sovereignty. Throughout this climactic section, Proverbs reinforces the idea that the heart is the source from which life flows. External compliance without inner alignment is insufficient. Wisdom must be cherished internally, shaping desires and intentions. The transformation described earlier now reveals its purpose. A heart attuned to wisdom naturally chooses life. The climax is not merely about behavior, but about orientation. Another critical element of this climax is the exposure of false security. Proverb warns against trusting wealth, status, or cleverness as ultimate safeguards. These may provide temporary comfort, but they cannot protect against moral collapse or divine judgment. Wisdom alone offers security that endures. This message challenges assumptions deeply ingrained in human thinking, confronting the belief that success can substitute for righteousness. As the climactic vision unfolds, Proverbs also affirms hope. Wisdom promises not only avoidance of harm, but positive flourishing. Long life, peace, and favor are portrayed as fruits of wise living. These blessings are not presented as guarantees of ease, but as the natural outcome of alignment with God's ways. The hope offered is grounded, realistic, and enduring. The climax of Proverbs, then, is a moment of clarity. All ambiguity fades. Wisdom is revealed as the path of life. Folly is the path of loss. The listener stands at a crossroads, fully informed and fully responsible. The teachings that began as gentle instruction now stand as decisive truth. This climactic message does not conclude the book's purpose, rather, it prepares the heart for deeper understanding. Having revealed what is at stake, Proverbs invites reflection on why wisdom matters beyond personal benefit, how it reveals God's heart and his desire for humanity. The next part will move beyond the climax into the deeper meaning behind wisdom's call, exploring what God communicates through these teachings and how wisdom reflects his intentions for human life. With the climactic contrast between wisdom and folly now fully revealed, Proverbs invites the listener to look beyond outcomes and ask a deeper question. What is God communicating about himself and his purposes through wisdom? The Proverbs are not merely moral observations or social advice, they are theological in nature. Beneath every instruction lies a revelation of God's character and his intention for human life. Wisdom, as Proverbs presents it, is a window into the heart of God. At its core, Proverbs communicates that God is not distant from everyday life. He is not concerned only with worship rituals or moments of crisis. Instead, God is portrayed as deeply invested in ordinary decisions, how people speak, work, plan, and relate to one another. Wisdom bridges the sacred and the ordinary, declaring that all of life unfolds before God's presence. This challenges the idea that spirituality can be separated from daily conduct. In Proverbs, faith is practical, visible, and embodied. The repeated emphasis on the fear of the Lord reveals a crucial theological truth. Wisdom begins with right relationship. God is not presented merely as a lawgiver enforcing rules, but as the source of order, meaning, and life. Reverence for God aligns the heart with reality as it truly is. When Proverbs declares that wisdom begins with the fear of the Lord, it affirms that understanding cannot be detached from humility before God. Knowledge without reverence becomes distorted, serving self-interest rather than truth. Proverbs also reveals God as a teacher. The language of instruction, correction, and discipline reflects a relational dynamic between God and his people. Discipline is not portrayed as harsh punishment, but as loving guidance intended to protect and mature. God's willingness to instruct assumes that growth is possible and expected. Wisdom, therefore, reflects God's patience and commitment to shaping character over time. Another key message embedded in Proverbs is God's concern for justice. Repeated warnings against dishonest scales, oppression of the poor, and corruption in leadership reveal that God's wisdom is inseparable from righteousness. God's moral order values fairness, compassion, and integrity. Wisdom aligns human behavior with these values, reinforcing the idea that ethical living is an expression of faithfulness to God. This emphasis reveals a God who cares deeply about how power and resources are used. Proverbs also communicates God's respect for human responsibility. While God is sovereign, he allows human choices to carry real consequences. Wisdom does not eliminate accountability, it clarifies it. By presenting life as a series of paths shaped by decisions, Proverbs affirms that individuals participate meaningfully in shaping their future. God's wisdom does not override human agency but works through it, inviting cooperation rather than coercion. The personification of wisdom offers further insight into God's intentions. Wisdom is depicted as calling, inviting, and delighting in those who respond. This imagery conveys God's desire for relationship rather than mere compliance. Wisdom's joy in those who seek her reflects God's pleasure in human responsiveness. The sorrow expressed when wisdom is rejected reveals a God who grieves over loss rather than rejoices in judgment. One of the most profound messages in Proverbs is that God's wisdom is woven into creation itself. The poetic portrayal of wisdom present at the foundation of the world suggests that moral order is not arbitrary. It is intrinsic to how the world was made. This means that living wisely is not about resisting human nature, but about aligning with the deeper structure of reality. God's wisdom sustains life, because it reflects the design of the Creator. Proverbs also addresses the mystery of timing in God's ways. While wisdom generally leads to stability and blessing, the book acknowledges that outcomes are not always immediate. This teaches trust. God's wisdom operates on a scale larger than human impatience. Faithfulness may not yield instant reward, but it remains meaningful. This perspective invites endurance, encouraging individuals to remain committed even when results are delayed. Another layer of meaning in Proverbs is its emphasis on the heart. God's message is clear. Transformation begins internally. External conformity without inward alignment falls short of true wisdom. God desires hearts shaped by truth, humility, and reverence. This focus reveals a God who looks beyond appearances, valuing authenticity over performance. Wisdom, therefore, is not about maintaining an image, but about cultivating integrity. Proverbs also communicates God's opposition to pride. Pride is consistently portrayed as a barrier to wisdom because it elevates the self above God. This message reflects a deeper theological truth. Dependence on God is essential for life. Pride disrupts this dependence, leading to isolation and distortion. Wisdom restores proper orientation, placing God at the center and the self in rightful perspective. The recurring call to trust in the Lord further reveals God's desire for reliance rather than control. Proverbs encourages planning and diligence, but warns against self-sufficiency. God invites trust not to limit human effort, but to anchor it. This balance reflects God's partnership with humanity. He invites participation while remaining the ultimate source of direction and provision. God's message through Proverbs also affirms the dignity of discipline. Correction is framed as an expression of love, not rejection. This reflects God's long-term vision for growth. Wisdom shapes individuals capable of discernment, resilience, and compassion. God's purpose is not merely to prevent harm, but to form mature character capable of reflecting His goodness. Importantly, Proverbs reveals that wisdom is accessible. God does not reserve wisdom for the elite or the powerful. It is offered to the young, the simple, and the inexperienced. This inclusivity reflects God's generosity and desire for all to flourish. Wisdom's public call emphasizes availability, removing excuses rooted in ignorance. Taken together, these themes reveal a God who is personal, just, patient, and deeply invested in human flourishing. Proverbs is not simply about living well, it is about living in harmony with God's heart. Wisdom becomes the means through which God invites humanity into a life marked by truth, peace, and meaning. As this understanding deepens, the relevance of Proverbs extends beyond ancient Israel into every generation. The next part will explore how these divine principles speak directly into modern life, how wisdom's ancient voice continues to guide decisions, relationships, and faith in today's world. Though the Book of Proverbs emerged from an ancient world shaped by agrarian rhythms, oral tradition, and communal life, its wisdom speaks with striking clarity into the modern age. The human heart has not changed. Desires, fears, ambitions, and struggles remain deeply familiar. What Proverbs addresses at its core is not bound to time or culture, because it speaks to the enduring patterns of human behavior under God's moral order. Its relevance today lies not in surface similarities, but in the timeless nature of its insight. Modern life is often marked by speed, noise, and distraction. Decisions are made quickly, information is abundant, and reflection is rare. Proverbs challenges this environment by calling for attentiveness and restraint. Wisdom urges pause before action, thought before speech, and discernment before agreement. In a culture that rewards immediacy, Proverbs reminds us that haste often leads to regret. Its emphasis on patience becomes a countercultural discipline, restoring depth to decision-making. One of the most direct applications of Proverbs today concerns speech. In an age shaped by digital communication, words travel farther and faster than ever before. Social platforms amplify voices, often without accountability. Proverbs' warnings about careless words, gossip, and harsh speech resonate powerfully in this context. Wisdom teaches that words shape reality, influence relationships, and reveal character. The call to speak truth with restraint and kindness remains as urgent now as it was centuries ago. Proverbs also speaks to the modern struggle with self-control. Consumer culture constantly fuels desire, encouraging indulgence and excess. Proverbs offers a different vision, one in which discipline leads to freedom rather than restriction. It reframes restraint as wisdom, not deprivation. This perspective challenges the assumption that fulfillment comes from satisfying every impulse. Instead, Proverbs teaches that peace is found in mastery of self, guided by reverence for God. Work and ambition form another area where Proverbs speaks clearly to contemporary life. Modern society often equates worth with productivity and success. Proverbs affirms the value of diligence and excellence, yet it also warns against overwork driven by greed or pride. Wisdom calls for balance, reminding individuals that integrity matters more than advancement, and that rest is not a sign of weakness but of trust. This balanced vision offers relief from the relentless pressure to achieve. Financial decisions, too, are addressed with timeless relevance. Proverbs acknowledges the necessity of provision but consistently warns against dishonest gain and obsession with wealth. In a world driven by consumption and comparison, wisdom calls for contentment and generosity. Proverbs does not condemn wealth itself, but it exposes the danger of trusting it as a source of security. Its counsel encourages stewardship rather than accumulation, reminding modern readers that true security rests in God. Relationships remain a central concern of Proverbs, and its guidance speaks directly into modern relational challenges. Trust, loyalty, and faithfulness are emphasized as foundations of healthy relationships. Proverbs warns against manipulation, envy, and betrayal issues that persist in personal, professional, and social contexts. Wisdom teaches that relationships flourish when honesty and patience govern interactions, offering an alternative to transactional or self-serving connection. Leadership, whether in families, workplaces, or communities, is another area where Proverbs remains instructive. Modern leadership often values charisma and control, yet Proverbs elevates humility, justice, and restraint. It reminds leaders that authority is a responsibility rather than a privilege. Wisdom encourages listening, fairness, and accountability, qualities that remain essential for ethical leadership in any era. Proverbs also addresses the modern experience of anxiety, uncertainty about the future, amplified by global instability and constant information, creates a climate of fear. Proverbs counters this anxiety with trust in God's sovereignty. It encourages planning while acknowledging that outcomes ultimately rest in God's hands. This balance offers peace without passivity, grounding effort in faith rather than fear. Another powerful application of Proverbs in modern life is its emphasis on character over image. Contemporary culture often rewards appearance and performance, sometimes at the expense of integrity. Proverbs exposes the emptiness of outward success without inward truth. It teaches that character shapes destiny more reliably than reputation. This message invites reflection on priorities, urging individuals to cultivate integrity even when it goes unnoticed. Proverbs also speaks to the modern challenge of isolation. Despite unprecedented connectivity, many experience loneliness and disconnection. Wisdom emphasizes the value of counsel, community, and shared insight. Proverbs warns against self-imposed isolation, recognizing that growth occurs through relationship. This teaching encourages intentional connection, reminding modern readers that wisdom is often mediated through others. Importantly, Proverbs does not promise a life free of hardship. Modern readers may be tempted to interpret wisdom as a formula for avoiding difficulty. Proverbs resists this simplification. Instead, it equips individuals to navigate hardship with discernment and resilience. Wisdom offers guidance for responding to adversity without surrendering to bitterness or despair. The relevance of Proverbs today lies in its ability to reorient life around enduring truths. It invites modern readers to slow down, listen, and realign priorities. Wisdom challenges assumptions, reshapes desires, and restores perspective. Its teachings are not antiquated, they are deeply attuned to the realities of human experience. As Proverbs speaks into modern life, it also calls for reflection. Application is not automatic. Wisdom requires attentiveness and willingness to be shaped. This leads naturally into deeper reflection on what it means to live wisely, not only in isolated moments, but as a sustained way of life. The next part will move into extended reflection on the lessons of Proverbs, exploring how wisdom forms a coherent vision for life that endures across seasons, challenges, and generations. As the voice of Proverbs continues to echo across generations, it invites not only application but reflection. Wisdom, as presented in this book, is not a checklist of behaviors to be mastered, but a way of seeing the world, a posture of heart and mind shaped over time. Extended reflection allows the listener to step back from individual sayings and perceive the larger vision Proverbs offers for a life lived well before God. One of the most enduring lessons of Proverbs is that wisdom is cultivated, not inherited. No one begins life wise. Proverbs assumes immaturity, simplicity, and vulnerability at the starting point of the human journey. This assumption is not meant to shame, but to invite growth. Wisdom is portrayed as something pursued deliberately, often through trial and correction. Reflection reveals that wisdom values progress over perfection. The wise person is not the one who never errs, but the one who learns, adjusts, and remains teachable. Another lesson that emerges through reflection is the unity between inner life and outward action. Proverbs consistently refuses to separate character from conduct. It teaches that what a person loves shapes how they live. Actions are the visible expression of internal orientation. This insight challenges superficial morality, reminding the listener that lasting change begins within. Reflection exposes the futility of attempting to appear wise without becoming wise at heart. Proverbs also teaches that life is cumulative. Small choices repeated consistently shape destiny. This lesson resists the modern desire for instant transformation. Wisdom forms slowly, often imperceptibly, through habits and patterns. Reflection on this truth encourages patience and perseverance. It reassures those who feel unseen in their faithfulness that wisdom's fruit ripens in due time. The repeated emphasis on listening highlights another key lesson: wisdom grows through attentiveness. Proverbs teaches that those who listen to God, to counsel, to experience, are positioned to grow. Reflection reveals that listening requires humility, an acknowledgement that one does not possess all understanding. In a culture that often equates confidence with certainty, Proverbs redefines strength as openness to instruction. A further lesson emerges in Proverbs' treatment of discipline. Correction is not portrayed as rejection, but as investment. Reflection helps reframe discipline as an expression of care. God's willingness to correct reveals his desire for growth rather than condemnation. This lesson offers comfort to those who experience struggle, reminding them that difficulty can serve a formative purpose when received with humility. Proverbs also invites reflection on the nature of success. The book challenges definitions rooted solely in wealth, status, or influence. Wisdom presents success as alignment with God's ways. Peace, integrity, and stability are elevated above outward achievement. Reflection reveals that a life rich in wisdom may appear modest by worldly standards, yet it carries depth and endurance that superficial success cannot provide. Another significant lesson concerns the power of words. Reflection on Proverbs' teachings about speech reveals how profoundly language shapes reality. Words influence relationships, communities, and self-understanding. Wisdom's call to restraint and truth invites a more thoughtful engagement with communication. This lesson becomes especially meaningful when reflected upon in light of regretful words spoken or healing words received. Proverbs also teaches that wisdom is relational. It is shaped through interaction with others, through counsel, correction, and shared experience. Reflection reveals the danger of isolation, which can distort perspective and reinforce folly. Wisdom flourishes in community, where insight is refined and accountability is brand. This lesson encourages intentional relationships grounded in mutual growth rather than convenience. The theme of trust emerges as another central lesson. Proverbs repeatedly invites reliance on God rather than self-sufficiency. Reflection exposes how often anxiety arises from attempting to control outcomes beyond human capacity. Wisdom offers release from this burden, calling for faith that anchors effort in trust. This lesson brings peace, especially in seasons of uncertainty. Proverbs also teaches realism about human nature. It does not idealize people or deny the presence of temptation and failure. Reflection reveals wisdom's honesty. It acknowledges weakness while offering guidance toward strength. This realism fosters compassion both toward oneself and others, reminding the listener that growth is a shared human journey. A deeper reflection reveals that Proverbs is ultimately about orientation. Every teaching points toward a fundamental question: whom will you trust, and what will guide your life? Wisdom calls for alignment with God's order, trusting that His design leads to life. Folly represents resistance to that order, resulting in fragmentation. This lesson clarifies that wisdom is not merely about making good choices, but about choosing the right foundation. Proverbs also invites reflection on legacy. Its teachings are framed generationally, emphasizing transmission of wisdom from parent to child. Reflection reveals that wisdom is meant to outlast the individual. A wise life influences others, quietly shaping families and communities over time. This perspective encourages long-term faithfulness, even when immediate impact seems small. Another lesson concerns resilience. Proverbs equips individuals to endure hardship without losing perspective. Wisdom does not guarantee comfort, but it provides stability amid change. Reflection reveals that wisdom strengthens the inner life, enabling perseverance without bitterness. This resilience is rooted in trust and reverence rather than circumstance. Finally, Proverbs teaches that wisdom is a gift to be cherished. Reflection reveals its value not as a tool for control, but as a guide toward life. Wisdom is portrayed as precious, worthy of pursuit, and protective in nature. To reflect on Proverbs is to recognize the generosity of God in offering such guidance. These lessons, when considered together, form a coherent vision for life, one marked by humility, attentiveness, trust, and integrity. Proverbs does not overwhelm with abstraction, it invites steady transformation. Reflection deepens understanding, allowing wisdom to move from knowledge into lived reality. With these reflections in place, the journey through Proverbs approaches its conclusion. The final part will draw these themes together, offering a gentle invitation to continue pursuing wisdom and allowing its voice to shape life beyond the page. As this journey through the Book of Proverbs comes to its close, we return to where wisdom always begins, not with answers, but with attentiveness. Proverbs does not conclude with a final command or a neatly packaged resolution. Instead, it leaves the listener standing at a crossroads, fully aware that wisdom is not something completed, but something continually chosen. Its voice does not fade with the final line, it lingers, inviting reflection long after the words have been heard. Throughout Proverbs, wisdom has spoken patiently, consistently, and clearly. It has addressed the heart before the hands, intention before action. It has revealed that life is shaped not by isolated moments, but by daily decisions guided either by reverence or resistance. The wisdom offered is neither harsh nor distant. It is compassionate, grounded in the deep understanding that human life is fragile, complex, and profoundly meaningful. One of the most important truths Proverbs leaves us with is that wisdom is relational. It flows from a living relationship with God, grounded in reverence and trust. The fear of the Lord is not an abstract concept. It is a posture of the heart that acknowledges God's authority and goodness. This posture shapes how one listens, chooses, speaks, and lives. Without it, wisdom becomes fragmented. With it, even simple understanding gains depth and clarity. Proverbs also reminds us that wisdom is accessible. It is not reserved for scholars or leaders alone. It is offered to the young and the old, the experienced and the inexperienced. Wisdom does not require perfection, only willingness. The repeated calls to listen, to receive instruction, and to seek understanding reveal a God who desires growth rather than condemnation. The invitation remains open to all who are willing to hear. As the book closes, the contrast between wisdom and folly remains stark, yet hopeful. Folly leads to isolation, instability, and loss. Wisdom leads to life, peace, and integrity. These outcomes are not portrayed as rewards earned, but as the natural fruit of alignment with God's design. Proverbs leaves no doubt that choices matter, and that direction more than speed determines destination. In a world filled with competing voices, Proverbs offers a steady guide. It does not promise ease, but it offers clarity. It does not eliminate struggle, but it equips the heart to endure. Wisdom teaches when to speak and when to remain silent, when to act and when to wait, when to plan and when to trust. These lessons do not grow outdated because they are rooted in the unchanging nature of God and the enduring realities of human life. Perhaps the most gentle yet profound message of Proverbs is this: wisdom is meant to be lived. It is not merely studied or admired. It is practiced in quiet moments, unseen choices, and consistent faithfulness. A wise life may not always attract attention, but it leaves a lasting imprint on families, communities, and generations yet to come. As this reflection concludes, the invitation of Proverbs remains before us: to listen more carefully, to choose more deliberately, to trust more deeply. Wisdom does not demand a dramatic beginning. It begins with a single step, a willingness to align one's heart with God's ways today. If these reflections have stirred something within you, consider returning to Proverbs not as a book to finish, but as a companion to walk with. Let its words shape your thinking, guide your decisions, and steady your heart. Read slowly. Reflect honestly. Apply humbly. Wisdom grows where it is welcomed. Thank you for spending this time exploring the wisdom of Scripture. If you found this journey meaningful, you may wish to continue engaging with God's Word, allowing it to speak into the ordinary and extraordinary moments of life. Wisdom is always calling. The question, as Proverbs gently asks, is whether we will listen.